The aerial photograph of Izbica taken by ICTY investigators on the 8th of August of 2001. As you can see, Izbica is a rural village located in a valley. From around the 24th of March, due to heavy artillery fire from FRY and Serbian forces, villagers from surrounding areas moved into Izbica as a place of refuge. On the 28th of March, Serb forces surrounded the village of Izbica. They found hundreds of refugees huddled together in a large field where they began to demand money from them. Approximately 150 adult males, mostly elderly or infirm, were ordered to line up on the main road. At this time, the women and children were ordered to leave and go towards Albania. The men were then again split up and were told to walk in different directions. A survivor from one group recounted that in his group, about 33 of them were made to walk toward the woods. And when they reached the stream, they were told to kneel, and almost immediately the troops escorting them opened fire, killing many of them. A survivor in the second group said that he and the 75 or so men with him were made to walk towards the town of Vragodol, and after a short distance, they were also made to line up against the woods, and they were shot. 2 elderly women were too fragile to leave with the main convoy of women and children, and they had been placed on the back of a trailer. Serb forces then simply set fire to the trailer, burning them alive. You will hear that about 127 people were killed in that incident. They, together with 12 people killed in other incidents, were buried by local villagers. A local doctor, Iliri Loshi, recorded on video the dead bodies where they were found and also their subsequent burial. Dr. Loshi's video and still photo images from that video will form part of the evidence that the prosecution intends to enter at this trial. At this time, I propose to show you some brief excerpts of that video to provide insight into what occurred. You can see as the line of bodies, as the camera pans to the right, we have edited this video to remove most of the most gruesome parts of it. However, still caution the viewers that this is a horrific scene. At the end, you will see a close-up of an elderly man with crutches. On the 17th of April, 1999, Dr. Loshi's video, together with aerial imagery, were broadcast throughout the world by a NATO spokesperson. Apparently, the response from Belgrade TV was that the images were fake and suggested that the video was recorded in either Macedonia or Albania. In essence, they denied the reports of the massacres. However, subsequent aerial imagery of this area, taken on 4 different days, paint a conclusive picture of attempted subterfuge and cover-up by the Serb authorities. If you would turn with me to the monitor, and I apologize for the quality, but perhaps we could point out the area where you saw, first of all, on the left photograph, there's an area taken on the 9th of March, 1999, and there's a square drawn around the area. That's a photograph showing an undisturbed field with no graves. A similar photo taken on the 15th of April, 2 weeks after the massacre, at least on the original, clearly shows rows and rows of disturbed ground depicting a gravesite. We'd move to the second photograph. As you can see from the photograph taken on the 15th of May on the left-hand side, the grave site is still there. You can see the rows of little lines. But then if you look on the right, the photograph taken on the 3rd of June, it's a big black mark. They're gone. It looks like one large mass of disturbed ground. Subsequent investigation revealed that on the 1st and 2nd of June of 1999, FRY and Serb forces returned to Izbica and removed the bodies from the graves. On the 27th of June 1999, a French forensic team examined the gravesite at Izbica and found no bodies, but they did find evidence of human remains having been buried there. They seized numerous artifacts, made sketches, and photographed the site. Their conclusion was that 139 people had once been buried there, but the location of those bodies is still unknown. To this date, the bodies have not yet been found or identified. Serb authorities have recently admitted, however, that they removed the bodies. Now, I pause here to point out something of additional significance in my submission. It shows that Serb authorities attempted at first to deny the allegations, but when evidence from the satellite images confirmed the allegations, they embarked on a cover-up campaign. The architects of this attempted subterfuge failed miserably. They never expected that the international community would go to the lengths it did to painstakingly investigate these grave sites. They never expected that their attempts at cover-up would provide further evidence of the purposefulness of their crimes. They mistakenly thought that they had covered their tracks. They were wrong. The evidence from the survivors, combined with the photographs and the forensic evidence, will leave the trial chamber with no reasonable doubt as to what occurred. I move next to Kačinik. The municipality of Kačinik is situated near the border of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. It includes two important border crossings, General Janković and Globačića. The main administrative town is Kačinik, with the remainder of the municipality comprising about 80 smaller villages and hamlets. During the course of the trial, I anticipate you will hear evidence that between March and May of 1999, forces of the FRY and Serbia launched massive attacks against many villages in this municipality. In particular, on the 9th of March 1999, the village of Kotlina, situated in the mountains near the Macedonian border, was shelled and entered by the Vijay and the police acting in concert, resulting in many houses being destroyed and burned. Shops were looted and destroyed, and animals were killed. After the Serb forces left, the residents returned to their village. About 2 weeks later, on the 24th of March, 1999, the village was shelled from a different direction, and the male population fled to the nearby woods. Some of the men who fled were captured and taken back to the village, where they were detained in a field along with older men, women, and children. The men were then made to lie down, face down, in the field. The women and children were put into military trucks and taken in the direction of Kačinik. The elderly men were made to walk in that same direction. But after the trucks had left, the captured men were taken to a small hill where there were 2 shafts in the ground. And although they tried to put up some resistance, they were no match for about 150 armed police and Vijay soldiers. As they reached the edge of the shafts, the men were beaten and thrown down into the shafts. About 30 minutes later, an explosive device was activated in each of the holes with the expected devastating results. It's September of 1999. An Austrian forensic team excavated the bottom of those shafts and recovered remains of 22 bodies, from which only 17 were capable of being positively identified. I move next, if I may, to Vusetern. One of the prime examples of the methodology used by the Serb forces to implement their forcible transfer or deportation campaign is evidenced by what occurred in the municipality of Vusetern. Again, this municipality is comprised of numerous smaller villages and hamlets connected by a narrow dirt road and small foot tracks. As was the pattern in many of the other municipalities, Serb forces followed on the heels of the departing international monitors toward the end of March 1999 and escalated their attacks on villages in the Vusetern municipality. Refugees in this area fled to Vusetern for what they hoped would be safety. Many of those refugees were gathered up by Serb authorities and sent by buses to Macedonia. Some escaped expulsion by fleeing to rural villages such as Studimi I Epermi. That village's population swelled by 10,000 refugees within a short period of time. Again, following a pattern or a modus operandi seen throughout the Kosovo deportation campaign, on the 14th of April, the MUP, in concert with members of the VJ, set up an observation post complete with 4 tanks on the hills above that village. Then, according to the witnesses, the combined forces of the FRY and Serbia started a massive sweep of all the villages and hamlets in the municipality, starting from the north and literally driving or herding the refugees ahead of them towards Studimi e Eperne. This roundup resulted in the Kosovo Albanian refugees desperately fleeing in a convoy of tractors, carts, various means of improvised transport, as well as on foot. That convoy is reported to have been 4 to 5 kilometers long and was comprised of approximately 30,000 people. At some point in the afternoon, the Serb forces forced the convoy to a halt near a large field. Many of the refugees were then robbed of their money, jewelry, or other valuables by both police and soldiers under the threat of death. Many were beaten, and a number of them were executed on the spot, seemingly at random. The convoy was eventually escorted by MUP and VJ forces to a location just outside Vusetern, where the men were separated from the women and children. The men were sent to prison, and the women and children were sent to Albania. Local Kosovo Albanians who survived this attack later buried 104 victims who had been killed that day. During July 1999, the forensic team exhumed and performed autopsies on 93 of the bodies, examining shell casings, clothes, and other artifacts. Their report and findings will be tendered into evidence by the prosecution and summarized in the expert report of the pathologist Dr. Bakard. Among the findings, you will note that 97% of the violent deaths were due to firearms. The location of the entry wounds in almost half the cases was from the back, and the firing was generally at close range. Your Honors, my brief overview of these 4 deportation sites is but a representative sample of what occurred in the balance of the deportation sites contained in the indictment, and indeed in the rest of Kosovo. Time, obviously, does not permit me to provide an overview of all the sites. You will also note that we have charged a dozen of what are termed as killing sites. Some of these overlap, some do not. I propose at this time to refer to only 2 of the killing sites, because they represent the kind of conduct prevalent for all the sites, including an additional unique set of facts. I am referring, of course, to the evidence of an additional cover-up whereby bodies of Kosovo Albanian victims were exhumed from original grave sites in Kosovo, transported by refrigerator trucks, and reburied in various locations throughout Serbia, some near Belgrade itself. Let me turn first, if I may, to Suvareca. Suvareca is the principal town, composed of about 90% Kosovo Albanians, within the large municipality by the same name. It is situated in a mountainous region in South Kosovo. Now, you've heard my colleague, Mr. Nice, talk about the Milosevic-Holbrooke Accord. Following that accord, the OSCE KVM, that is the Kosovo Verification Monitors, were established to independently observe and report on whether the terms of that agreement were being adhered to. The KVM, therefore, moved, among other places, into Suvareca in November 1998, and eventually leased premises from a family known as Berisha. As a result of the threat of imminent NATO bombing, the KVM were evacuated from Kosovo on the 20th of March 1999, as a result of which, in Suvareca, from the 22nd of March onwards, tensions escalated and shooting began throughout the municipality, with Serbs ordering Kosovo Albanians to leave the area. In effect, the Serb forces moved in hot on the heels of the withdrawing KVM. The speed with which they moved is an indication that they were prepared in advance and were just waiting for the moment to do so. On the 25th of March, Serb policemen went to the Berisha compound and held members of that family at gunpoint while they removed all of the property and equipment belonging to KVM and demanded money from the Berisha family. Then, on the morning of the 26th of March, members of the Berisha family saw two tanks with their cannons facing toward them, parked on a hill above their compound. At midday, witnesses will say between 30 and 50 policemen dressed in different kinds of uniforms left the police station in a group and headed directly toward the Berisha compound. Now, I invite you to turn with me to the photograph that is on the Elmo at the moment. The area you will see with the yellow arrow points to the Berisha house compound, which had for some time earlier been the KVM office. The area to the right of the road in front is very close to where the police station was. The evidence will be that a number of policemen, 30 to 50, congregated en masse and left and went towards that Berisha house. They then ordered the residents out of their houses, following which, in panic and fear, the family started to try to run away to safety. During this process, 6 members of the family were shot dead, and the remainder, some of who had been wounded, were herded down the street, and that is in the direction from the right to the left of the photograph. So down the street, continue on to the left, into a coffee shop which was situated about 70 meters from the Berisha compound. So down the road and then down towards the blue arrow is a coffee shop. At this point, at least 41 civilians, consisting of 22 adults and 19 children under the age of 18 years, were forced inside the cafe. According to the witnesses, a local policeman, who appeared to be in charge, walked into the cafe and said, "There will be no Albanians alive. We will eliminate them." With that, a number of policemen went into the coffee shop and opened fire on them, killing nearly everyone inside. Just to make sure they had accomplished their objective, they then threw grenades inside. This is what the interior of the cafe looked like after the bodies were removed. Unbeknown to their assailants, however, not everyone was killed outright. The few who survived lived to provide the evidence you will hear or read about during this case. According to the witnesses, a yellow truck, known to be used by that same policeman who appeared to be in charge earlier, pulled up outside of the cafe, and the bodies from inside were loaded onto it, including 2 women who had merely been wounded, along with the 8-year-old child belonging to one of them. The truck was then driven in the direction of Prizren, but along the way, the 2 injured women and the small child jumped off the truck and managed to escape. Now, during this slaughter in Suva Reka on the 26th of March, 47 members of the Berisha family were killed, including men, women, and children with ages ranging from 12 months to 81 years, including a 24-year-old woman who was 8 months pregnant. I pause to point that out because that will become significant in something I will say later. In June of 1999, after the Serb forces had left Kosovo, a mass grave was located in the Suva Reka graveyard. A British forensic team excavated the gravesite and tentatively identified the bodies of 6 of the Berisha family. A month later, in August of 1999, the British forensic team also exhumed the gravesite located on the Suva Reka to Prizren Road, known as the firing range. At that gravesite, they found the remains of human bodies, together with a large quantity of clothing, which has since been identified as belonging to those persons massacred in the coffee shop. The forensic team concluded that the firing range gravesite had been re-exhumed since the initial burial, and that mechanical diggers had been used in the process. Well, you will also hear evidence about the results of exhumation sites in an area outside of Belgrade called Batanica. One of those sites was located outside the perimeter fence of the grounds housing the anti-terrorist police, refer to it as the SAJ. Between the 12th and 26th of June of 2001, approximately 37 bodies were recovered from that site. In addition to recovering the bodies of 13 men, the remains of 14 adult females, 9 children, and a 7 to 8 month-old fetus were found. You will, of course, recall that one of the women murdered in the cafe was 8 months pregnant. What was even more startling was the fact that the identification documents found among the clothing of several of the victims revealed identification of at least 7 people who had been victims of the Suva Reka massacre, which occurred on the 26th of March, 1999. It will be submitted that this evidence clearly points to an attempted cover-up by FRY and Serbian authorities who hid the bodies where it was hoped they would not be found. Again, the architects of this cover-up failed miserably. They obviously didn't expect that thorough and dedicated forensic examinations would not only reveal evidence of their original deeds, but would also expose the botched attempt at hiding the evidence of their crimes. But exhumations did not stop even there. Between the 10th of July and the 15th of September 2001, forensic teams turned their attention to a site now inside the barracks of the secret police in Bačanica, near Belgrade. This site revealed the bodies of at least 269 people, and again, various identification items were discovered, 8 of which refer to individuals registered with the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, as having been last seen at the village of Meja in the province of Kosovo on the 27th of April, 1999. And that, of course, leads me to turn to Mea as the second killing site I want to discuss. Mea was another of the killing sites mentioned in our Kosovo indictment. Again, we submit, this exemplifies further evidence of an attempted cover-up by relocating bodies to where it was thought they would not be found. Again, they miscalculated. Mea is but one of the villages in the municipality of Đakovica. The entire area suffered murders and various acts of persecution in furtherance of what the prosecution submits was an ethnic cleansing campaign. In addition to Mea, during March of 1999, forces of the FRY and Serbia launched house-to-house offensives in the town of Đakovica, killing, looting, burning, destroying religious and cultural sites, and expelling the population. The following video clip gives you but a brief glimpse into the extent of destruction suffered by many of these towns and villages. Although this is only a brief clip, and I could have played you a 15-minute clip, but I've only selected less than 2 minutes. Practically the entire town had been laid to ruin. You will also note near the end of the clip that the mosque has been severely damaged. Could we play the clip? I'm not sure whether this requires narration, but you can certainly see the massive destruction of all these homes. Nothing is left but empty shells. That this was once a thriving community is hard to imagine when we see the amount of destruction. And this is just one of the streets. Practically nothing is left for anyone wanting to return to use. One of the sites in Đakovica you will hear about is located at 157 Milosevic Street. It involved a 4-room house. As you can see on the Elmo now, this is one of the compounds that is so typical of what my friend referred to as a multicultural type of Albanian home. The photograph on the top shows basically a compound with what used to be a home and a business premises near the front where there was a pool hall. What happened on the night of the 1st of April of 1999, 20 women and children, having heard of the problems and approaching Serb forces, sought shelter in the basement of the building that is left standing, which was, I believe, a sort of a pool room. A group of uniformed armed men came in and ordered them upstairs into the area that had once been a house. You can see that just rooms are left now. One of the gunmen then shot the group of 7 women and 13 children. One of the children, a 10-year-old boy, survived. He could see that his mother's body had shielded his toddler sister from the bullets. And you could hear that his sister was still alive under the pile of bodies because he could hear her calling to him to save her. Because he was shot himself, he was unable to lift his mother's body to save his sister. You look now, you'll see that's what happened when Serb soldiers set fire to that house and the pile of bodies. Imagine his horror when he saw the assailant set fire to the house. Imagine his agony and sense of helplessness, images of which still haunt him today, knowing that his sister was burned alive. That night, he witnessed the gruesome executions of all of his cousins, his mother, all of his sisters, 2 of his aunts, and their friends. His survival will enable him to testify before this tribunal about those horrific events which otherwise would merely have added to the statistics of numbers of persons killed. But these people are more than just statistics. They were innocent civilian victims who could by no stretch of the imagination be considered to be legitimate military targets. Speaking of statistics, you will hear that over 50 unarmed civilians were killed that night in this neighborhood alone. These locations are not the only ones where killings took place in that municipality. For example, in the village of Korenica, toward the end of April, apparently in retaliation for an attack by the KLA on 5 policemen, 34 unarmed civilian males and 2 women were summarily executed and their bodies burned. The bodies were then buried by local gypsies, or Roma, on orders from the Serbian MUP, but were subsequently dug up and reburied elsewhere and have not yet been found. In another incident of convoys, the convoy of refugees passed by a MUP checkpoint in Mea when a group of about 20 males between the ages of 12 and 70 were separated from the convoy and taken to an adjacent field. They were then forced to kneel with their hands behind their heads and peremptorily shot. Again, records from the ICRC show that over 340 persons were reported missing from the Mea area, and of those, identification documents referring to at least 8 of them were found in a mass grave in Belgrade. Again, evidence of their crimes are being discovered and continue to be investigated as this trial commences. Again, piece by piece, the jigsaw puzzle becomes clearer, showing the similar pattern all over Kosovo. Civilians are murdered and buried. Then, when there is a danger of the crimes being discovered, an organized attempt is made to dig up the bodies and move them elsewhere. All to no avail. I pause here to indicate that perhaps the persons responsible may have learned from their experience in Bosnia, including the ICTY exhumations and investigations into Srebrenica, and therefore took these kinds of steps to conceal what had been done. The means by which these bodies were relocated is no longer a particular mystery. You will hear evidence from witnesses, who I'm not able to name at this time, in light of protective measures having been granted, that Serb authorities ordered the bodies to be exhumed and transported by refrigerator trucks to other locations. Refrigerator truck? There it is. Although it is not alleged that the truck in this video is the particular truck used to transport bodies to Bačenica, Belgrade, it is an example of one of the means by which these bodies were removed from Kosovo as part of the cover-up to avoid discovery. This truck was found in the Danube River and contained the bodies of about 80 Kosovo Albanians. You'll see the feet sticking out of the back. And turn next, and very briefly, to sexual assaults and destruction of religious sites. Because I've indicated that this case is primarily about deportation and has as a component a massive amount of killings designed to intentionally create an atmosphere of fear and oppression through the use of force and acts of violence. But there are other charges as well. You already know that in count 5, the accused and others are charged with persecution. But that count also alleges persecution by sexual assault of Kosovo Albanians and by the wanton destruction or damage of Kosovo Albanian religious sites. I expect that you will hear from a number of female witnesses who were the victims of sexual assault. These witnesses will describe how the soldiers, taking part in the deportation roundup of civilians, executed a group of about 17 men, and then selected of a group of 50 to 100 women from among their captives, and raped them in front of the rest of the group. You will hear of a 14-year-old girl being raped in front of her family. You will hear from one witness that she was in a group of 27 women and children who were held by soldiers in a cowshed. They were robbed, threatened with violence, and then searched, consisting of being stripped naked and sexually assaulted. Many of the women and girls were raped. Various witnesses will testify that their sister and mother, respectively, were among 8 women who were taken out and did not return. Their naked bodies were found dead in the wells near the shed. Others will tell the various stories of how they were attacked by Serb soldiers, robbed, their husbands or other family members murdered, and then they were raped. Still others will describe the horrors of being gang raped by soldiers in succession. For these women, quite apart from the horror and trauma brought about by these offenses, the crime of rape and sexual assault carries with it an even greater stigma and social consequence than for women from other cultures or religions. Some have not even told their families they were raped. For example, one young woman, engaged to be married at the time she was sexually assaulted, was subsequently rejected by her husband once the fact that she had been sexually assaulted was made known to him. It takes great courage for these victims to come forward to tell the world the truth of what happened. As you can appreciate, some of these victims have sought protective measures to protect their identities, which have been granted by this tribunal pursuant to the rules of evidence and procedure. Consequently, those who have been granted permission by the court will be testifying either in closed session or by way of pseudonym and facial distortion. Many of the witnesses in the course of their evidence will also describe the destruction of mosques or other religious sites being destroyed by Serb forces. You will hear the various witnesses tell of their mosques being burned or shelled or subsequently destroyed by explosives. Not only will you have the accounts by many as to what occurred to the religious sites in their particular village, but you'll also have the benefit of an expert report prepared by members of the Kosovo Cultural Heritage Project from Cambridge, Massachusetts. A synopsis of that report, which you will have for consideration in the course of the trial, indicates a number of very interesting findings, all of which corroborate the evidence of the local witnesses. Their research revealed that approximately 225 mosques were damaged or destroyed in Kosovo during 1998 and 1999. Much of the damage resulted from explosive devices planted in the mosque or inside the minaret, artillery aimed at the minaret, or fires started in the mosque. Here is but one example of a damaged mosque. This particular one of a number we could have chosen, happens to be a mosque in the town of Vucetern. In some cases, attacks were accompanied by anti-Albanian or pro-Serbian graffiti written on mosque walls. Vandalism was also directed at religious scriptures, which were either torn, burned, or desecrated. In some municipalities, the mosques and other Islamic cultural heritage sites were the only buildings in a neighborhood that had been singled out for attack. In one municipality, Peć or Peja, every one of the district's 49 Islamic monuments had been attacked. Furthermore, this study dispels Serbian claims that most of the damage was caused by NATO air attacks. In the majority of municipalities, not one mosque was found to show any sign of damage attributable to an air attack. Some, reputed by Serb authorities to have been damaged by air attacks, were found subsequently by the researchers to be completely intact. Others that were found to indeed have been damaged or destroyed were determined to have been damaged from the ground up and not from the air. According to the report, only 2 of all the locations suffered damage attributable to air attack. The evidence we submit will lead you to the irrefutable conclusion that these religious and cultural sites were specifically targeted by the forces of the FRY in Serbia who were engaged in this campaign of persecution. As you listen to the evidence unfold, Your Honors, over the next 5 to 6 months, you will undoubtedly be struck by the fact that, first of all, there was coordination between the VJ, the MUP, and the other forces of the FRY in Serbia throughout the campaign. Secondly, time and again, the patterns repeated themselves. Men were separated from the women. Men were often murdered. Women and children were deported. Thirdly, attacks predictably included verbal abuse, threats of violence, removal of identification, looting and burning of property, killing of livestock, murdering of non-combatants, rape of the women, and destruction of religious sites. Fourthly, people were herded into corridors and were either escorted by uniformed Serbs or put onto buses or trains to speed up their exit from Kosovo. And fifthly, that same pattern happened at practically the same time in different municipalities all over Kosovo. At the conclusion of our case, the prosecution submits that the body of evidence submitted will leave the trial chamber with no reasonable doubt but that the accused is guilty as charged on each count of the Kosovo indictment. Thank you, Your Honors.
Thank you, Mr. Reinfeldt. Mr. Milosevic, it's now your opportunity to address the chamber. Before you do so, I should tell you this about your right to silence in this trial. You have a right of silence during the trial. You're not obliged to give evidence, to question witnesses, or to make submissions. However, you may make a statement now. You may not be asked questions about the content of the statement, but the statement will be made under the control of the trial chamber, and the trial chamber will decide on the probative value, if any, to be attached to the statement. You may give evidence on your own behalf at the appropriate time, in which case you will be subject to cross-examination. Other than when giving evidence, you're not obliged to answer any questions about the facts of the case, but should be aware that if you make statements about the facts during submissions to the court, such statements may be part of the material considered by the trial chamber in reaching its decision on the case. This ruling does not apply to questions on procedural and administrative matters. This statement will be put into writing and given to the accused. Finally, you may sit or stand to address the court, whichever you prefer.
Da li vi završavate rad danas u 4 sata?
Do you stop work this afternoon at 4 o'clock?
We stop at 4, so if you'd like to make a start now, we'll adjourn then and you can go on tomorrow.
Ja mislim da nema smisla da
I
počinjem i da
don't
budem
think
prekinut
there's
odmah
any
posle
sense
pola
in me
sata,
starting
pošto
and
sam
being
2 dana
interrupted half an hour later. I have spent 2 days
Ovo je
listening to the speeches made by the prosecution.
Are you asking to start tomorrow morning? Is that what you want?
Vi ste mi objasnili prošli put
You
kada
explained to
smo
me last
ovde
time when we were here,
bili na statusnoj konferenciji,
when we attended a status conference
da ću
here,
ja imati pravo da govorim i koliko
that
sam
I
sad
would have the
razumeo,
right to speak.
vi mi dajete to
And as
pravo
far
da
as I
govorim.
was able to gather now, you are giving me
A
that
ja
right.
smatram da je
However, I
logično
consider that it would be
da
logical
počnem kada neću biti prekinut
for
odmah
me
posle
to begin
sat manje od pola
without
sata.
having to be interrupted less than
Ali bih
half an
mogao
hour
da
hence.
iskoristim,
But I would like to take advantage of this opportunity nonetheless.
ali bih
Very well, you can address us tomorrow. But what is it you would like to add?
htio sam da iskoristim pre
I
nego
wanted
što
to take
počnem,
advantage of this
da govorim,
opportunity before I begin
da kažem
speaking
da sam,
and
kao što
delivering my
znate,
speech to
ovde više
say
puta
that,
pokretao i
as
neka
you
pravna
know,
pitanja
several
o kojima ne
times here
mislim
I've
da
brought
govorim u
up
svom
some legal
izlaganju,
aspects. I won't be mentioning
na
those
koja vi
in my
niste
speech
dali
proper,
odgovor.
but I have received no response or answer
Naime,
from you.
vi znate da
You know
svi
full
i
well
međunarodni,
that all
a i
international
nacionalni
and national
dokumenti i pravila
documents and rules and regulations
određuju
determine
da sud može
the
suditi
fact
samo onaj
that
koji
a
je
court
ustanovljen zakonom.
can
Ja sam ovde
be there to
otvorio
judge
kao
only if it has
prethodno
been
pitanje,
established on the basis of law.
pitanje legalnosti
And
ovog
I
suda.
have broached the question of
Vi o
the
tome
legality of
niste
this
dali nikakav
tribunal.
odgovor.
You did
Naime,
not
vi ste
provide me with a
razmatrali to
response.
pitanje kao pitanje
You
sudske
delved into the
nadležnosti,
question and looked
iako se
into the
pitanje
aspects of
legalnosti ne
court
podudara sa pitanjem
authority,
sudske nadležnosti, jer se
although
sudska
the
nadležnost
competences of the
odnosi
court
na
are not the
sudske
same thing
institucije.
as the court's
A ja sam
legality.
osporio legalnost na
And
osnovu
I
činjenice
challenged the
da ovaj sud
very
nije osnovan
legality
zakonom,
of this tribunal
da
because it was
Savet
not set up
bezbednosti
on the
nije
basis
mogao
of the
preneti
law.
na sud
The
pravo koje
Security
sam nema
Council could not
i da prema
transfer
tome
the right that it
on
does
ne
not
može da
have
sudi.
to this tribunal, and therefore this
Ja
tribunal does not
očekujem
have the
da
competence to
sud,
try.
odnosno da vi
I expect
odgovorite
this
na te pravne
tribunal, or
činjenice,
rather you,
a
to
očekivao
respond
sam
to those legal
i da
facts.
ćete,
And I had
kako su vam,
expected,
ili bar kako je jedan od prijatelja
as
suda
one of
sugerirao,
the amici
tražiti
curiae
savjetodavno mišljenje
suggested,
Međunarodnog suda pravde,
that I
koje
seek the
također
advice
niste
of the
tražili.
international, that you seek the advice of the International Court of
Smatram
Justice,
da
which you failed to
je to
do.
pitanje
I consider that
od
this is a question
izuzetno
of prime
velikog
importance.
principijelnog
It
značaja
is of
i za
principled
međunarodno pravo,
importance both for
i za
international
pravdu
law
uopšte
and for
i da bi
justice
moralo da
in
bude
general,
razrešeno.
and that it will have to be
Mislim da sam ga
resolved.
dovoljno
I
objasnio,
think that I have sufficiently
onda kada sam
expounded and
ovde,
explained the issue
osim usmenog
when
objašnjenja,
I
predao jedan prilično obiman
sent
tekst u
you
kome su po
a lengthy
tačkama
text
nabrojani
with all the
argumenti.
points that set out my arguments,
se
and I
to
also did
odnosi.
so orally here.
Drugo pitanje koje
The
želim
second
također
point
kao
that I wish
prethodno
to
da raščistim,
raise and wish to
ja sam na statusnoj
clarify
konferenciji ovdje
is that
pokrenuo
at the status
pitanje
conference
mog
that was held
nezakonitog
here,
hapšenja,
I raised the
u
question of
kome je
my illegal
učestvovao
arrest,
predstavnik tribunala
and the representative
koje
of
je
the
izvedeno u
tribunal
Beogradu,
had a part in that. It took
kršećem
place in
Ustava Srbije,
Belgrade, it
kršećem
violated the
Ustava
Constitution of
Jugoslavije,
Serbia and the Constitution of
zbog čega
Yugoslavia,
je savezna vlada
and
podnela ostavku,
the federal
zbog
government
čega su
tabled its
pokrenuti
resignation
krivični
because of
postupci u
that,
Jugoslaviji,
and criminal lawsuits
a znam
have
s
been the
druge
result
strane
in Yugoslavia.
da je
They have been
svaki sud
filed.
dužan
And on
da
the
to
other hand, I
pitanje
do know
habeas
that
corpusa
every
raspravi
court
pre
is
početka
duty
suđenja.
bound to
Vi
deal
to
with the
niste uzeli u obzir,
habeas corpus
niti
question
ste
before the start of trial.
zakazali
You failed to take
saslušanje
that into
u vezi s
account,
tim predmetom,
nor did
koje,
you
s obzirom
schedule a
na
hearing
propise,
with that
ste dužni
respect, and
da
which
zakažete,
rule
jer su ta
you were
pitanja
duty bound to
regulisana
do based
svim
on the rules and
deklaracijama
regulations. Those questions
o
are
ljudskim i
regulated
političkim
by all
pravima,
human rights and political
univerzalnim,
rights,
evropskim,
declarations,
američkim i
universal
drugim, o
ones,
kojima vi kao
European,
pravnici
American, and
veoma
others.
dobro
And
znate,
you, as men
a na
of the
kraju
law,
krajeva
are
i
well
vašom
acquainted with
sopstvenom
that,
praksom,
and through
jer
your
ste
own
pitanje
practice as well, you
nezakonitog
have become
hapšenja
acquainted
u
with
raznim
that,
prilikama
because you
raspravljali.
have been
Prema
discussing the
tome,
question
ja vas
of
upozoravam
unlawful
da ste i
arrest
tu
in
napravili jedan
other
veliki
cases.
propust,
So
jer ste
this has
bili
been a greater
dužni
mission on
da
your part.
napravite
You were duty
saslušanje u
bound
vezi
to
sa
call a hearing with
nezakonitim
respect to the
hapšenjem
unlawful
koje je
arrest
nadavnom izvršeno,
that took
odnosno
place on
u vezi
over
sa
my
činjenicom
person,
da sam
and
ovde
with respect to the
doveden
fact that I was
na
brought
osnovu
here
izvršenja zločina,
on the basis
koji
of a
se
crime having been
kao takav
committed.
ne tretira samo
A crime
u
which is
zakonodavstvu
not
moje
only
zemlje,
treated in the
već u
laws of my own
zakonodavstvima
country,
svih
but it
država
is an
i
issue
u svim
treated in the
međunarodnim
laws
aktima
of
i
all
konvencijama.
states and is present in all international
Dalje,
conventions and so on and
pokrenuo
so
sam
forth.
pitanje
Furthermore,
koje također
I
niste htjeli
also
da
broached a
rešavate,
question which you too
a na
did not
koje
wish to resolve,
sam ukazao ukazao s mnogo argumenata
And I put forth many arguments
da se
to
uopšte
bear
ne
out
može ovdje govoriti
my
ni o
point.
kakvom
I said that
ravnopravnom
we
i fair
cannot
suđenju,
speak of a fair
pogotovo
trial and an
o
equitable trial here,
nepristrasnosti tužioca.
especially an
Vi
unbiased
znate da je
stand on the part of the
1990.
prosecution. You
godine
know that
Kongres
in
Ujedinjenih
1990 the
nacija
United Nations
doneo
Congress
svoje uputstvo
adopted its own set of
o
instructions
tužiocu,
with
generalno,
respect to
u kome
prosecution
se
and the prosecutor. These were
zahteva
general
da mora
guidelines
biti
demanding
nepristrasan.
that there must
U ovom
be
slučaju
no
mi
prejudice
smo
and that there must be
iz svega ovoga što
impartiality.
smo ovdje slušali
From everything that we
više
have
nego
heard
se
here so
uverili
far,
ne da
we
je
have
pristrasan,
become more than convinced
nego
that not only
vaš
is
je
it
tužilac
partial, but your
već
prosecutor
objavio i moju
has
presudu.
proclaimed my
Iz vašeg tužilaštva
sentence
se
and
orkestrira
judgment.
medijska
And
kampanja
the
koja se
prosecution has
vodi i
orchestrated a media
organizuje
campaign that is
paralelno
being
suđenje
waged and
preko medija
organized. It is a
koje
parallel
uz ovaj
trial
nelegalni
through the
sud
media,
treba
which, along
da
with this unlawful
odigraju ulogu
tribunal,
jednog
are there to
paralelnog
play
linča
the role of
koji
a
treba
parallel
unapred,
lynch
bez
process,
ikakvih uvida.
which, in advance, without any insight,
I'm going to interrupt you. What do you mean by saying that the prosecutor has proclaimed your sentence and judgment?
U javnosti. Uostalom,
in public.
prethodni tužilac
And
je
the
na
previous
sastanku
prosecutor at a
sa
meeting
Albrightovom
with Albright
izjavio i zajedno izjavili da se
said,
nalaze na
they
istom
both
poslu.
said that they were
A ona je
engaged in
predstavljala
the
u svakom
same
slučaju ratujuću stranu.
business or job.
Sama tužba je
And
podneta
the
na bazi
indictment
konstrukcija
itself was
britanske
raised on the
obaveštajne
basis of
službe
the
u vreme rata
constructions of the
protiv
British
Jugoslavije.
intelligence service during the war against
A zna se
Yugoslavia. And we know full
da
well
obaveštajne službe
that
daju
intelligence
selektivno
services
podatke,
only give out
one
selective
koje mogu da
information and
montiraju,
details,
a
those
ne
that they
daju
are
one
able to rig,
koji
and
im ne
not
idu u prilog.
those
I
which
tako
are
dalje. Mislim,
not to
ima-
their advantage,
ima
and so
mnogo
on and so
argumenata
forth.
koji se tu
There are
mogu
many
upotrebiti. U
arguments
svakom
that could
slučaju,
be
ja vam
raised here,
ukazujem
but
da
at all events, I should
o
like
tome
to
niste
indicate to
raspravljali,
you that
niti
you did
doneli
not
kakvu
discuss
odluku.
these
Niste, dakle,
matters, nor did you
raspravljali,
make a
niti
decision of
tražili
any
savjetodavno
kind. You
mišljenje
did
Međunarodnog
not
suda pravde o svojoj
call upon the
legalnosti.
International Court of Justice
Niste
as to
se,
the legalities of the issue,
niste zakazali
and you did
saslušanje
not
koje ste bili
schedule
dužni da
a hearing which
zakažete
you were
po
duty
osnovu
bound
habeas
to do on the
corpus
basis of
i po
habeas
osnovu
corpus,
činjenice da je vaš
and on the basis of the
predstavnik
fact
učestvovao u
that your
izvršenju
representative took part in the
Mr. Milosevic, you indicated earlier that you wanted to make your submissions tomorrow. That's apparently not the case, because you're wanting to address us today. But the matters on which you are choosing to address us are matters upon which we have already ruled, as you would know if you'd taken the trouble to read our decisions. You had the right of appeal, you did not take it. The matters, therefore, have all been dealt with, and your views about the tribunal are now completely irrelevant as far as these proceedings are concerned. All the matters you raised, you've argued before, and we have ruled upon, and there is no need for them to be raised again in these proceedings. We will hear the rest of your arguments and submissions tomorrow morning.
Ja ću tek da počnem izlaganje.
Madam Prosecutor, there is one matter which we may be able usefully to discuss in the time available. It's this. I said earlier that we would discuss on Tuesday the future conduct of the proceedings. And it may be helpful if you had in mind a possible timetable in view of the need for there to be an expeditious hearing of this case. Of course, it's difficult to lay down a timetable in advance, not knowing how long cross-examination and the like is going to take. But as far as the prosecution case is concerned, there is this consideration. The original rulings we made were made in the light of Kosovo being a single trial. There is now a joint trial, and that will reflect on the general conduct. The original timetable we had in mind was some 90 witnesses finishing by the recess. We would wish to reconsider that for this reason, that before we embark on Bosnia and Croatia, there must clearly be time for preparation for the accused, the amici, and also the court. So what we have in mind is this, that we should bring forward the conclusion of the Kosovo case until a date towards the end of June or the beginning of July. That would allow the Chamber and others 2 months in which to prepare for the remainder of the case. Now, we recognize that that will mean you're having to cut down the Kosovo case and also the number of witnesses, and no doubt you'll say that you've been doing it as far as possible, but perhaps you'd like to have another look at that, having regard to the time available for this case as a whole, because even with that timetable, it would seem that the prosecution is going to last a year at least, which is long enough, I should have thought, for any prosecution, even given the seriousness and complexity of this case. Perhaps you'd like to consider those matters, and we'll discuss them next Tuesday. We'll adjourn now. Perhaps I could remind everybody that we shall not be sitting a full day tomorrow because this courtroom is needed during the course of the afternoon. Yes. Mr. Nice, I don't want you to respond to that.
No, I wasn't going to.
No.
It's an entirely different matter that I wanted to raise, a very small administrative matter that I've been asked to raise. Of course, this trial is very well publicised, and the consequence of that is that nearly all witnesses to come will very probably have had an opportunity of hearing on their televisions or elsewhere what it is that the accused may say tomorrow. The first witness to come, who's a witness who deals with contacts with the accused and who will be in this building probably tomorrow, has asked very rightly and properly whether he may have permission himself to see what it is the accused is saying. Normally that would be thought undesirable, but it seems in the circumstances of this case where every other witness is likely to know in advance what the accused says, it would be reasonable and fair for him to have that knowledge as well.
Is there any particular reason why he wants to know?
I imagine he's extremely interested, but he has asked, and I transmit his request to you, and it may in fact indeed save time, because if the accused touches on matters that are of concern to this witness and this witness's evidence, then it will probably save time.
No, we think it more desirable that he doesn't.
As Your Honour pleases.
As I was saying, we'll sit tomorrow at 9, and from 9 till 1:45.
I'm also aware, one other point, that His Honour Judge Robinson's question asked of Mr. Reinveld hasn't yet been answered. Perhaps we'll deal with that a little later, and perhaps after the accused has said what he has to say.
Very well, we'll adjourn.
All rise, veuillez vous lever.